What weapon traits in Pathfinder 2nd Edition are the best ones? Which ones are they? And can picking the wrong one land you in traitment? What am I doing with my life? This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to be going over what I believe are the top 5 weapon traits for Pathfinder 2e. I'll first explain what weapon traits are all about with a very quick summary, and then we'll jump into the list itself in no particular order. I'm generally going to be choosing weapon traits that are more universal, rather than being very build specific, but of course there's going to be some unavoidable specificity in these choices. And at the end, I'll do an honorable mentions for a quick list of some of the weapon traits that didn't quite make the list, but are still rather lovely. If you find this video helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing. You can also press the join button to become an archivist of the Dominomicon, and I've also got a Patreon set up now if you'd like access to our private Discord server, Dominomicon Sanctum, where I'll be floating around, responding to questions and chatting nonsense occasionally. But enough of that preamble, let's get in there. Cue the soundtrack. Okay, so what are weapon traits in PF2e? That's an excellent question, and I'm very glad you asked it because that's the topic of today's video chapter. Well, quite simply, every weapon in PF2e has at least one trait, and each of them do different things. Here's a list of them all on screen now, and yeah, there's quite a few. Most weapons come with multiple traits, and generally the rarer weapons will have more traits, and even rarer traits also. Of course, traits do different things, and generally they're pretty balanced. Ultimately, when picking a weapon, you're going to have to make some pretty difficult choices. A lot of the time, you'll be balancing out that damage die with whether or not you want it to be one-handed, what damage type you want it to deal, etc., and then you'll be looking at the traits to see which ones sound good for your character. Not all weapon traits are positive, like the Cobbled trait, and some weapons have traits that simply say an ancestry name. These ancestry traits do not restrict an ancestry from using one of these weapons, it's just to show that these items are usually associated with a particular culture. And that's weapon traits basically summed up, so let's begin with the list itself, starting with... So, we're starting off with the classics. Deadly and Fatal aren't exactly the same traits, and they function somewhat differently, but overall they are crit-oriented traits and have a very similar functionality. Ultimately, when you get a crit with one of these weapons, you'll do even more damage than weapons without these traits. So Deadly simply adds another weapon damage die on a crit. So if you deal 1d8 normally on a crit, you'd roll that d8, double the result, and then add another d8 that doesn't get doubled. And in most cases, but not all, the damage die that you add after the doubling is one step higher than the one you usually use. Sometimes it's more than one step as well. And the amount of extra non-doubled dice increases once you get to a greater striking rune, which is usually around level 12-ish, and then another dice gets added again when you get a major striking rune around level 19. As for Fatal, again, this triggers on a crit, but it increases your normal weapon damage dice by 1 or even multiple steps. So if you had a d8 weapon and crit and the trait said Fatal d12, you'd roll a d12, then double that, and then add another d12 that doesn't get doubled. And while this doesn't get extra dice added like deadly weapons do, remember that you'll be rolling extra dice as you get striking runes anyway, and their damage will be increased from that d8 to d12, so it's still a lot of extra damage. So it's pretty self-explanatory why I like these traits so much. They just do a crap ton of damage. They're nice and simple and easy to work out, and there's nothing wrong with one-shotting enemies, literally, with an amazing crit with one of these weapons. Most of the time you'll find these traits on ranged weapons, which I really love because it's PF2e's way of showcasing when you get like a headshot or you hit a vital area like the neck or something. I love how they made these weapons actually have extra mechanical effects for something that's usually just for roleplay flavor only. I imagine most people watching this video chapter will be well aware of these traits because they're incredibly popular within the system itself, and that's for a very good reason. That extra damage that they do can really be encounter changing. Do not sleep on picking these traits if you get the opportunity. Okay, next up. It's funny, agile weapons actually discourage tactics a little bit because they somewhat go against the very carefully designed strategic element of the game by sort of making the multiple attack penalty less impactful. So agile weapons simply reduce the MAP from -5 to -4 on your second attack, and your third attack goes from -10 to -8. Nice and simple, and definitely not to be dismissed because, as we all know, every +1 matters. For classes, they get multiple attacks per turn from one action, such as the Monk's Flurry of Blows or Twin Takedown for the Ranger. Agile is a no-brainer, as you'll be attacking multiple times per turn anyway. It's basically all of the time. And since the remaster, Agile now affects things like Grapple and Trip, so long as you're using a free hand to do them, or an Agile weapon, which slightly encourages players to do more than just attack, 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 which I adore. And that -8 as opposed to a -10, remember that's actually kinda technically a +2 to hit with that third attack. And yeah, -8 sounds sounds like a lot because, well, it is a lot, especially in Pathfinder 2e, but a +2 to hit with any attack is still amazing. Just ask the fighter and gunslinger, the annoying crit machines that they are. Agile weapons do tend to have lower damage dice than non-agile weapons, but it really isn't that big of a deal. The difference between a d6 and a d8 is, on average, 1 damage. Is that really that big of a deal? 1 extra average damage is okay, but is it better than a +1 to hit on a subsequent attack? Food for thought, and for the maths boffins out there, which sadly I am not because I'm a magical book or whatever. Anyway, let's roll on to the next weapon trait. Reach is a GM's best friend. You know why? It's because your players rarely ever expect it, and when you pull it out, the look on their faces. Absolutely priceless. It's why I love being a GM, getting to punish players who have the audacity to use combat tactics to defeat my encounters. The nerve! So Reach is easy to explain. It increases your range from melee adjacent to 10 feet. This ability is famous, obviously massively famous, everyone in the universe has heard of this, for being amazing on classes that get reactive strikes, such as fighters. This is because if an enemy needs to get in melee range with you, they will trigger that reactive strike if your weapon has reach and they are striding, because that's just how reactive strike works. If an enemy moves while they're within range of your weapon and it's not a step, you can indeed take a strike. It's also an amazing trait because you can probably get away with not having as much movement speed as a non-reach weapon using character and still being able to hit enemies just as regularly, if not more regularly. Just bear in mind that the squares that you can attack around you have now effectively doubled in range. Lest we forget flanking, you now don't need to be directly next to an enemy to be flanking them with an ally. And you could even stand behind a party member and attack enemies sort of through them. The enemy would more than likely get some sort of cover, but still, it's possible to do this if you might be a bit low on health and maybe not all that tanky yourself. If you're clever with positioning, you can potentially give yourself lots of advantages in combat while using this trait. Reach, I believe, is one of those traits that advanced players understand the importance of and new players don't think to use all that much. But do not dismiss the importance of having a reach weapon. It can be a game changer in the right hands. Okay, let's keep on going. Versatile comes in multiple flavors, but it essentially allows you to alter what damage type you are dealing to enemies. So if your weapon normally deals slashing damage and it has versatile P, that means you can change the damage type to piercing each time you deal damage if you like. And if it's versatile B, that's bludgeoning, and so on. The reason this is such a good trait is because of how resistances work in PF2e. Enemies can have varying levels of resistance in this system, signified by the number next to it. So if an enemy has a resistance 5 to slashing, like most skellybobs in PF2e, then that sword you're using is going to have to do 6 damage just to inflict 1 damage to the skelly. But if you can change it to piercing, well, that doesn't work against skellybobs either, but it does against other creature types, so shut up. Bludgeoning is the damage type you want for skellies, and if you have a weapon that can swap over to that damage type whenever, you're going to have a lot more chances to actually deal good damage against those enemy types. And there are a lot of monsters with resistances in PF2e. It's hardly a rare thing for enemies to have in this system, so choosing a versatile weapon really opens up your damage options. Versatile is another one of those traits that is kind of slept on, usually for something like 1 dice size of damage higher, but I honestly think it's worth a lot more than that, and you will too when you come across an enemy that resists your main weapon damage and you have to either drop your weapon and draw another one that may or may not have runes on it, or you'll just have to keep hitting and hope to your deities that your damage is enough. Bear in mind that most resistances for monsters start at resistance 5, so with that d8 you'd better roll high or you'll be doing next to 0 damage, unless you can bypass the resistance. And let's not forget weaknesses. If you find out what weakness a creature has, like a zombie shambler having weakness 5 to slashing and your weapon is versatile S, you can swap over to that damage type whenever you want and absolutely obliterate that monster. Versatile really is a powerful trait even if it doesn't seem like it. You'll certainly be glad you took it when encountering certain monsters, and your party will be too. And now we're on to the last weapon trait. Now, this one was a tough choice because Trip was right there too, and I'd possibly say it's somewhat a toss-up on which one is better, but I chose this because of the slight power boost it got in the remaster. Disarm is normally a skill action that uses athletics versus reflex DC, but when a weapon has it as a trait, it means that you don't need a free hand in order to do it, as you'll be using that weapon itself for the skill action. To top that off, once you get a potency rune on that weapon, you get to add that +1, +2, +3 to the skill check, increasing your chance of actually succeeding, and that's nothing to turn your nose up at. How do you actually turn your nose up at something? Does it just mean like lifting your head? And that's nothing to lift your head up at. It just doesn't sound as punchy. Maybe it's because we're used to the former? Something to bring up on my next date, maybe. That's an interesting topic, right? Yeah, it is. Yeah, definitely. So back to Disarm. I have mentioned this skill action in my more fabulous skill actions video, which I'll link to the description as always, but briefly, Disarm has you make that athletics check, and on a success, the enemy's grip is weakened on their weapon, and they take a -2 to attack rolls unless they spend an interact action fixing it, which can trigger a reactive strike. Otherwise, they keep that -2 forever and 4 days, which is a long time, especially those 4 days. Further attempts to disarm the target gain you a +2 circumstance bonus, meaning that you can maybe successfully disarm the enemy because you need to get a critical success for that to actually happen, or your allies can give you a hand. And when the enemy is disarmed, well, that could potentially be a big deal. One thing I recommend massively with Disarm in particular is disarming enemies with shields. If you can take that shield from them, that shield block they keep doing is probably going to be one of their main abilities as a monster in PF2e, so taking that from them means that they've probably lost their main ability and should be a lot easier to take down. But the reason this is so good on a weapon, of course, is because you don't need a free hand, as I've already mentioned, and the bonus you get from your runes can really add up. It's basically just a matter of time before you successfully disarm a creature, and that could potentially be encounter changing depending on the creature type. And quite frankly, forcing them to take a -2 on their attack rolls is a pretty phenomenal tactic in general anyway. I've yet to see any of my players build a character around Disarm, but I'm really looking forward to when they do, because I think it will be unbelievably hilarious watching them disarm each and every enemy they get next to. Let me know if you've built a Disarm build. I want to know how well they function. Okay, so that's my list of what I believe are the top weapon traits in PF2e. So let's go for the honorable mentions. These didn't quite make the cut, but they're definitely spicy in the right situations. Trip, I briefly mentioned this, but it's practically as good as Disarm, but the crit fail conditions are a little worse, and I think it's easy to get enemies flanked anyway, so I still think Disarm is like 1% better, or 1% more interesting at least. Still, Trip is great for control and is quite a strong weapon trait overall. Propulsive, if your ranged build uses strength at all, amazing, but it's pretty rare. Grapple, tank builds love this. Pair with Titan Wrestler and you'll be forcing enemies to contend with yourself or get MAP trying to escape. Amazing for tanky builds who want to lock down the battlefield. Sweep and backswing, niche but nice if you're swinging constantly. Forceful for strikers who don't want agile, this ramps up fast. And lastly, thrown for those times when you just really need to smack a goblin on a rooftop before it runs away. So there we have it, my personal picks for the best weapon traits in Pathfinder 2e. Whether you're slashing, stabbing, smashing, or just showing off, these traits can hopefully make all the difference. As ever, if you find this video chapter helpful or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing and press that join button, or check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel financially. Regardless, thank you very much for watching, and let me know in the comments what your favorite weapon traits are, and if there's any that I missed that you would definitely have in your top 5. And a shout out to my members and archivists, Max Magnus 20019 and Aussie Smith. Thank you very much for the support. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominomicon wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.